dedicated to each and every one of you who appreciate a great glass of wine. You know what I mean?
It's Monday. Let's raise a glass to the beginning of another week. It's time to unscrew, uncork, or saber a bottle. And let's begin exploring the wine glass. Welcome back, wine friends, to part 2 of our deep dive into the fascinating world of Beaujolais and its terroir-driven treasures. If you thought part 1 was geeky, buckle up, because we're heading into the final hour of the seminar where things really start to click. We continue exploring how over 300 soil types shape the personality of this region and taste through the remaining wines that bring those soils to life in the glass. It's the conclusion of an eye-opening, palate-pleasing journey through granite and beyond. And I promise it'll leave you seeing Gamay in a whole new light. While you are listening, it would be greatly appreciated if you could take 1 minute to subscribe, rate, and review. It takes only a few seconds of your time, but means so much to the show. Also, please be sure to check the box for automatic downloads so that new episodes of Exploring the Wine Glass show up in your next up feed. The next best way to support Exploring the Wine Glass is to tell your friends. If you enjoy the podcast, your wine-loving friends will too. Follow me on all the socials. And finally, don't forget to head to the website exploringthewineglass.com to read the blog and sign up for the newsletter to keep up with all happenings. Slancha.
Hey everybody, I'm Lori Budd, a UC Davis winemaking program, Spanish wine scholar, sommelier service, champagne and Côte d'Aron specialist, and a WSET Level 2 graduate. You can find Exploring the Wine Glass on all the socials, as well as your favorite podcast catchers. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to swipe, subscribe, rate, and review. Stay in the know about all things wine by visiting my website, exploringthewineglass.com. I promise I'll never tell you what to drink, but I'll always share what's in my glass.
So 21, we talked about 22, group in with 20 in terms of another solar vintage where there may have been vine stress from heat, but overall a really great vintage, lots more darker fruit. Spice profile is there, but not as prevalent because there is fruit and weight and broadness to stand up. And overall, the vintage as a whole was pretty uniform across not only the soil types, but the crues. So 22 is a great vintage to check out, and it's still a baby in my opinion. You were talking about aging. I mean, the 19s in a vintage like this are just starting to come around, which freaks some people out when it comes to Beaujolais because they think you need to drink it right away. So that's 22. And then 23 is back to kind of classic Beaujolais, where it wasn't the rough nature of 21, but it wasn't so generous and solar as 22. But the 23 that we have today is for how youthful it is, showing really quite well. And so I'm excited about the 23s that I get to try. I want to try them across the various regions and see if the crues stand out in that, because that would be a vintage where the crues could stand out and show their actual signature for the cru, independent of whether it was a cold or hot year. So I'm excited for the 23s.
Yeah, it's great to see as the years goes. Beaujolais has a lot of old vine material, and a lot of these old vine Goblet vines that, were planted 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago. So it is a little bit different than some, say, New World wine regions where not only do you have vintage variation, but then you have, when were these vines planted, what was in vogue at the time, how to plant, whether it was chasing ripeness or otherwise. These are much more consistent over the years because they are these really beautiful old vine Goblet vines.
Cool. Everybody pour their whites out if you haven't already. We're going to come around with the first flavor bets. Yes. Oh man. Do you have anything on top of your head for 24? Or you don't?
Yeah. 24 is it's a very wet year. So a lot of rain during the whole season, pretty much everywhere in France. So it's a tough year when you have to deal with cryptogamic disease such as mildew region that put a lot of pressure on the wine grower to grow and to keep out from. So the Beaujolais, the chance of the Beaujolais is the soil, the granite soil and the sandy soil are very grainy, so we don't keep the water and the moist in the vineyard as much as some area which is more clay or more farm. But it was a lot of pressure, and so the production is it depends on the producer, but it could be lower because of that. That being said, the summer was pretty warm, and if you dealt well in the spring with and the early summer with the crypto, it was good, very good. But again, there's no, I mean, for producer's point of view, there's no bad vintage. You know, like the press makes the vintage more trendy or more, because on an average, it's better. You know, like when you pick a 2020 or 2022, on an average, it's going to be usually better, and the profile can please most people. But usually, like great producer, when you take the bad vintage, it's pretty awesome wine and pretty delicious wine usually. So it's just when going back to what we were talking about earlier, it's a question of taste, what you look for. If you look like a very warm, richer, almost a Beaujolais who looks like a road, go for 2020, go for 2022, you're gonna have this, you know, dark fruit, jammy kind of flavor profile. But if you're more you know, like with light fruit, blackberries and everything, go with 2021 or pepperiness or greenness or earthiness. Go to 2021, 2023, maybe 2024. That's going to be more your thing.
As someone who's loved Cru Beaujolais for several years now, this is actually my first time having Blancs. And that third one was very reminiscent of Meursault. Is that kind of a strange observation? I mean, it had the nuttiness. I was very surprised by that flavor profile.
I think some of that too. I think a lot of that is the winemaking technique, because they did really focus on some time in oak to really push the boundaries of that like richness, that texture, that lushness.
Yeah.
And I think it's great to have on the flight, because you can see that there is a variety of Beaujolais Blanc out there. I would say in general, probably definitely it's more typical to see not so much oak aging on Beaujolais Blanc, but I think that's beautiful to have on the flight, because it shows you what happens when you do, and try to push that textural component of the wine.
We'd have to consult bottles. We can get those for you though, in terms of the alcohol levels.
Perfect. So this flight coming around right now, this flight is all about granite, right? That's one of those things that comes to mind almost immediately when most people think Beaujolais is granite, right? And the reasons are many for that. There's granite throughout Beaujolais, most notably in the western hillsides. Shows its presence quite a bit in northern Crus, and of course Gamay loves granite. As we get into, again, this is igneous rock that formed when Beaujolais was above ground about 300 or 400 million years ago, and therefore it cooled in the air, which cooled slower and created a more friable rock. And again, like the granite that you see here, that's just really hard, actually as soil in the vineyards, a lot of times it's this really friable kind of a flaky granite that looks like tiny little just red flakes of gold. So we're getting into the first appellation. We have two side by side. Sirocco. Sirocco is very, very interesting. So it is bar none the highest cru out of all of Beaujolais. It is also the cru it's the only cru that is 100% on granite. It is granite all the way through. It's up on the high western side. There's a really, really beautiful, this photo that you see here, this is actually taken from the top. There's a panorama there that, again, if you visit the region, it's absolutely worth it. It's about a 10-minute drive up the hill. And you can look out from 650 meters, about 2,000 feet, over the entirety of Beaujolais. On a clear day, you can see Mont Blanc from that site. So.
That was one of the places when I was talking about the hikes and whatnot that I was thinking of, because we went up there And driving through Chirouble up from Fleury and Morgon, you think Fleury has got a lot of undulating hills and it's a little crazy. Getting into Chirouble and seeing the little kind of like 4 channels of where the vineyard's set up and the different exposures, I think heroic viticulture is an understatement in terms of what these people have to deal with in terms of, most of it is over 30% in terms of the incline. Your elevation it varies from 350 to up to 600 to change. So massive change if you're having to hike up vineyards and hand harvest this stuff because there's no ability to use mechanization here. And sadly, Chirouble gets overlooked a little bit because 1, it's smaller, 2, the elevation does play a role, and so it also has neighbors in Morgon and Fleury that overshadow a little bit, but Chirouble for me was one of the bright spots in the chance that we did get to go to visit because there's so much personality in that region that I want to explore more and taste more. And the 21s when we had them there were really bright and fresh. You can see it in the wines here today. There is a you do see the coolness of the 21 vintage through these wines. You do see a little bit of pulp clustery character as it comes through in the 2 wines, but I think it represents the tension and the bright kind of florality of Chirouble, which I found to be very charming. What was interesting is at the top of the hill, there's this thing called the terrasse. And it's actually the producers from Chirouble have come to form it. It's like a wine shop, wine bar, and a giant terrace. And they have events up there, and you drink wine overlooking the whole of Beaujolais. And then just down the road, you can go on this really beautiful hike. But halfway through the hike, you get to this forest that looks like it's from the Blair Witch Project. And it is the most densely planted forest I've ever seen in my entire life, to where I was like, there's no way this is natural, because it's a sunny day, like in that picture that you saw, and then you look in the forest and like 5 feet in, it's pitch black, like something out of a horror movie. And we came to find out that it was trees that were planted there. I can't remember what they were doing, whether it was for trees for commercial use or whatnot, but it is like trees planted in a 1-by-1 spacing. And it is, you walk in and where you're sitting, sir, I would not be able to see you.
That's the part. We almost lost Josh in there. It was crazy. He was like, bring me back to San Diego.
Yeah. So I will never forget that, just because it was a sunny day too. And so the light was like this eerie green-black light. It was a really cool experience, but it's something I won't soon forget. And the terrace with the wine bar, and the wine bar has a beautiful map of Chirouble on the back wall. It's done in chalk, and they have all the Ludis labeled up there. And it was a really unique experience. So Chirouble, if you can't tell, is kind of near and dear to my heart. So. These 2 producers that you're tasting, you have both 21s, Domaine de Maisonneuve and Domaine de Toulon. Domaine de Maisonneuve is actually a producer that is located in the Bruy-Côte de Bruy area. They've been producing Chirouble for a long time. They actually, as part of a festival that highlights Gamay, won Best Gamay in the world for the Chirouble in 2015, which is pretty cool because you'd think it would go to a Moulin-à-Vent or a Côte de Bruy or a Morgon or a Fleury, but no, it went to a lowly little Chirouble, and so it was like, hell yeah, let's do it for the little guy. And so you're tasting the 21 version of that wine, and they are organic in practice but aren't certified, which you do see sometimes because, as we talked about with the pressure with mold and mildew, there's a lot of influence in terms of veering towards organics and biodynamics, but sometimes producers don't actually take the step to be certified because of the constraints that come with that. And in vintages like 21, it's nice to have a little freedom to be able to combat certain things where needed in terms of viticulture and whatnot. So that's Domaine de Maisonneuve. They've been there since 1890. It's still family owned. Confusingly though, if you look it up, Jambon, like ham, is the family name. And then this would actually be labeled Domaine de Maisonneuve on the front label. So if you look it up online or go to the QR code and see both, don't be confused. We think it's a internal French versus export market thing, but we're not 100% sure. And then from there, Domaine de Toulon is a family-owned estate that actually, I really like this story because they were métayers, or sharecroppers. And they worked this property for the better part of 20 plus years, and then were able to purchase it from the owner and become owners of the estate and make the wines on their own, which is awesome to see because it's nice to see a kind of blue-collar approach throughout, to where they had worked the land, they had given their blood, sweat, and tears to it, and then were able to actually own it and put a product out that is uniquely theirs and not somebody that they have to hand off to somebody at some point and say, hey, here's the money for the fruit, great, but I want to try the wine. They can now be proud of that. So they make Toulon, they make Chirouble, they also make some Morgon, Fleury, but the Chirouble is their gem kind of in their arsenal in terms of Beaujolais wines. And so another great example, there's a little more weight and texture in terms of this when you compare it to the Maisonneuve. And the French are fun in terms of their willingness to discern information and give you information. I was hoping to get specific Ludis to talk about the variations between the two, but both houses were like, nah. And so my guess is the Toulon pulls from the plot that they're primarily at, but also has another plot as well. Whereas I would guess with the Maisonneuve, you're a little higher in elevation because if you taste that crunchy kind of red fruit and leathery character a little more so in the Maisonneuve. And so those are the Chirouble. And so we move from there down, and I'm going to stand up for this one because I'm going to go back to your question between Fleury and Morgon. And I apologize, Neil. So Morgon is a fun appellation. Whoa, my mic kicked in even more, I feel like. Is that just me hearing the like reverb? Morgon is interesting. Here, go back one. Nope, forward one. There, perfect. All right, so we see 1,000 hectares. Second largest cru in terms of the crus in Beaujolais. So fairly big. That's part of why you see it in the market a lot. Also, it has something to do with the producers. It also has something to do with the cachet of Morgon. What I think is interesting to note is often people associate Morgon with a story that is told through a unique group of producers, through a unique importer, that has become the overarching story for the region, which is awesome because they have something to champion it, but it's not the only story, it's not the whole story. Okay, so when you talk about the Gang of Four and the Côte de Pie and the Roche Pourri, that iron oxide rotten rock, that's where the bluestone pops up in Morgon. Okay, so that's this little section right here. Actually, I guess go forward to the third slide is so much better. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, yeah, perfect. Okay, so this is Morgon as a whole, and it's pretty large because you start over here and you get into the town, and the Côte de Pie just sticks out like a sore thumb. It's this beautiful hill right smack in the middle of the appellation, and you can see the goblet train vines just arched all over it. There's a little cross on top. Typically, this section on this side as you get down towards the town and down towards this kind of southeastern section where you have the higher, less deep Pierre Bleu, and then the really deep Pierre Bleu is where some of those vaunted plots are sourced for some of the Morgon that's become legendary, whether it's like Foillard's 3.14. But what's interesting is I reference Foillard in the Côte de Pie versus Cuvée Courcelette because as a sommelier, I'm guilty of not paying close enough attention to this. What's the huge difference there? Well, Côte de Pie, all volcanic stone. Courcelette, which is a climat, mainly granite. So I always wondered why I liked Courcelette better because it had this suave, kind of high-toned, red-fruited floral thing. Well, it's from a little higher elevation. It's granite primarily. It's less of the bluestone. So there's a reason behind it. There's a cause and effect. And I love that piece of it. So the one that you're having in your glass is Domaine Jonathan Pay. It is from the Bellevue within Courcelette. Okay? And so it is primarily granite. It is from a little higher elevation. So while it has the structure that Morgon brings to the table, there's a little more high-toned red fruit and high-toned crunchiness to it within the concept of Morgon. Okay, and Morgon is confusing because Morgon is one of the few appellations in Beaujolais that had size to have recognizable climats versus Ludis. So they had Côte de Pie. Côte de Pie is a climat. It's a bigger area. There's Ludis within it, like Chavronnière. Courcelette is a climat. It's a bigger area, but delineated within Morgon. Bellevue is a Ludi within that. There's Charme, there's Grand Cras. There's 6 of them for Morgon because Morgon kind of tried to separate itself from the rest and did their own thing. So this will come up later when we talk about Premier Crus because it gets kind of convoluted. But if you see Ludis versus Climats in Morgon, that's kind of where the confusion starts. So Climats are the bigger subsections. It's like Santa Monica versus Beverly versus downtown LA, as opposed to just Sunset Boulevard right where we are. There's a bigger umbrella, but it's not as big as the broader West LA area or whatever you want to look at it from for using a reference. In terms of back to your reference with Fleury and Morgon, I think I would have asked you in that moment if I continued what Morgons were you having, because when you're talking about a lightness to it or a different character, generally that makes me think you were possibly having something. As you go up this hill, you get higher in elevation. See Shirubla back there? So you're starting to climb higher up and you're getting more granite. So you get a high-toned character as you move up the hillside. You stick here on just the Côte de Pie, even if you're on the top of it and you're still not as high-toned, and that volcanic bluestone, as you'll see in the next flight, brings a different structural component to it, a different characteristic in terms of some of the flavors. So there's a terroir piece in terms of diving in. So without knowing the producers you were talking about, Morgon, I'd be curious as to what those were. Fleury is similar. Fleury is this giant mass of hills that are undulating. So whether you're talking about La Madone up on top of the hill or the plain, like producer plays a role and then crew within it. And this is the Burgundian piece that now needs to be applied to Beaujolais when you're looking at these regions, as opposed to just giving an overarching, like, hey, it's just Beaujolais, or hey, it's just Fleury. And that doesn't totally answer your question, I'm sorry, but that's at least pointing you in the right direction to where hopefully you can investigate and figure out. And then vintage would play a role too, because if you were having 21 versus 22, I mean, you're having the 22, apologize, you're only getting a little of this, but you can taste the power, even though it is kind of red fruited. It would be very fun to have a bluestone variant of Morgon right next to it. Because Morgon's a fun appellation. I wanted to hate it a lot because of all the pretension that lies in Morgon, but I love Morgon. They have a phrase there where they talk about a wine Morgons. It's actually a verb they use in French. It ages like a Morgon. It slowly becomes more and more Morgon-like. And some of the other regions in Burgundy or in Beaujolais talk about sa pinot. It pinots. It goes like Burgundy and becomes more Burgundy as it ages. Well, Morgon, they're very proud, so they call it Morgonian. And then a little bit about this producer, which Jonathan Pay is the producer. Sounds fairly American because he is. He is a winemaker from Sonoma who ingratiated himself into a community that is fairly insular and not willing to take people in over the course of a couple of years, and was able to buy plots in Morgon and Fleury. So he makes a small amount. He's very detail-oriented. I love these labels. Go take a look if you can. He just puts everything out there. 70-year-old vines. He was emailing me when he found out we were doing this, being like, hey, yeah, it's in Bellevue, but it's a little higher elevated. So it's granite Gamay from Morgon with a little more crunchiness and red fruit, and it's really cool to see his passion, because I'm pretty sure he probably had to be ostracized a little bit trying to ingratiate himself with the people of Morgon, because they're a very tight-knit community and they're very proud of what they do, and to let an American in to not only buy vineyards but make wine is no small feat. And so, a really cool producer with a great background, and 22 is the vintage here, so power and intensity, but still granite from Morgon. Yes, sir?
Could you elaborate on, you called the pretension of Morgon?
They're very proud to be Morgon in terms of they're one of the regions that has been recognized as being able to age, or they're one of the regions that was popularized when Kermit Lynch and his Gang of Four came through in terms of LaPierre and Goyard and whoever else you want to cite, Delaunay. And so it's a region with a little more cachet, and it's interesting when you go there. I'll let you tell the story of when we were actually at the tasting, because they have an air to them that is it's a little bit of like, we're Morgon, we know we're cool, and we're going to tell you about it. And that's why I said, like, I didn't want to like Morgon, but I find the characteristics of the wine as I experience them on a broader whole. I keep going back to it, and I enjoy it from a hedonistic perspective, and there's a charm to it that I'm willing to push aside some of the pretension that maybe rubbed me the wrong way. Greg, you want to tell the story in terms of, or should we keep that one for another time? It was just a very, very like Morgon moment where he took another crew and was like, I'll rinse my mouth with this before my Morgon. Yeah, kind of thing, like to dumb it down in a simpler way.
Needless to say, the producer from the other crew was just rolling his eyes like, okay, all right.
Yeah, he was trying to tell him, why don't you Morgon and just keel over? And so, yeah, I mean, my thing I focus on with Morgon is showing that there's diversity there. There's less than just the Côte de Pie, because that gets so much fame. and so much press in its own right, deservedly so, that people forget about the rest of Morgon and that there's variance.
But doesn't Moulin Avant get as much prestige as Morgon?
Absolutely. In a different vein, though.
Yeah, but it's more historic, I think. Morgon is more recent, like as you said, with Lapierre and Foyard and all those group of producers are a big part of the natural wine movement as well. So they kind of create excitement on Beaujolais, so that's why.
Well, I think to the lady's question in the back, the extenuation of that is to Fleury, where you have these producers like Dutrève and Bertrand and whatnot that are promoting Fleury in a way that hasn't been in the past. So you're starting to see people push Fleury in a way that hasn't been done in the past. So all of a sudden, Fleury from specific leaves may be getting more weight to it and be less of that wispy, just classic Beaujolais that we give it to before, and now all of a sudden it's a serious thing. Whereas Morgon is large. Not that Fleury isn't large, but Morgon's big, so there's a lot of Morgon produced, so you could have a producer that's making a little more Morgon than it should, and it's diluted, or they're doing something from higher elevation and it's specific to a Ludi that isn't a Côte de Pie, or a really heavy granite where you can get more structure. Maybe it's something from some of the alluvial Piedmont soils over here in Grand Cras. And so that's where that lens of specificity is important in terms of the evolution. So, yeah, good question. Yes?
Has there been any conversation, feel free to just say yes or no, as to the idea of like homes similar to Burgundy and how the weather comes in? It seems very apparent.
I was going to say, let us do the Ludis and then we'll start with cones.
But yeah, it's that kind of.
I mean, I think it's important, right? You always hear now with certainly the producers that are trendy getting hit with hail, and that's a cone in a specific spot that affects Fleury, because those are some of the producers that all the cool kids want to hang out with, but that's a subsection. And certain, like Chirula doesn't deal with certain things because it's on a slope and weather tends to go down the hill, but they deal with other things that are different. And so maybe that's something for the future. Yes, absolutely. I would think so.
Yeah, and you do have in Beaujolais all of these rolling hills with a lot of different aspects, and as we kind of touched on earlier, a lot of times in the past, a lot of these top Ludi were more focused on these kind of south, southeast, occasionally southwest facing sides. But as climate change is happening and all over Europe, I mean, people are looking for a little bit more restraint, higher elevations, higher latitudes, depending on your region. We're starting to see, we were talking to a producer in Chirogla, and again, you have all of these kind of transverse valleys like that, where you have these south-southeast facing hillsides, but also more northerly facing hillsides. And in the past, high elevation, 500 meter elevation, north facing Chirogla was a hard thing to make. It was very, very light, very, very sometimes even thin. But nowadays, producers, they talk to you like, look, I'm looking at vineyard land, north facing, pretty high elevation Chirogla, I'm looking to invest there as things are going. And so consequently, the rest of the zone is also taking on a little bit more richness. These wines that are at high elevation are shining like they have at least 30 years ago.
As a wine professional of a certain age, I feel like from the moment I started learning about wine, I learned to associate Beaujolais a lot of times with organic and very dynamic winemaking. And I feel like a lot of that has to come from the education we got about King of Four. And we were talking about their influence in the export markets, but also within Beaujolais. Do you think their influence of leading those organic viticulture expanded that idea within the region, or is their influence a little more exaggerated in your perspective?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah. Organic viticulture, it's growing. It's growing in Beaujolais. It's challenging to grow organically in Beaujolais for different reasons. One of the reasons is the heroic viticulture that we were talking about. So everything has to be done by hand and by manpower. So it's we obviously on the Beaujolais village area we have some kind of flat land that we can use easily mechanization, but in a lot of the slope it's very hard to use mechanization. So some treatment have to make by on your hand or with specific tractor, but it's kind of it could be challenging. Although it was for a long time, Beaujolais was badly known for using grass remover, like I don't know how you call that, but preservative. Yes, not pesticide, but it's pesticide for the insect. Wind killer. So you travel in Beaujolais and you see everything, all the grass dry because they were killing the grass with that, and that obviously doesn't work with organic viticulture. So the only option is to use your pioche when you say. So it's again manpower, so which is getting harder and harder. So that's why, but the movement is there. We're going.
And to your point, talking about kind of cause and effect, what he hit on there is important because Beaujolais was definitely guilty of some of the most influential pieces of industrial viticulture that were possible in terms of just weed killers and pesticides in heyday. And so this group came about as an effect from the cause of that, of eschewing all these novelties of ease of making wine and going back to the roots of whether it be organic or biodynamic or natural winemaking. And that's where these producers came about pushing that. And yes, they've had an influence, but what was nice when we went to see was that it wasn't as overarching as I would assume based on the narrative here in the US, or excuse me, I shouldn't say the US, in the markets that I've worked in. And I found that very refreshing because it was nice to see diversity of styles, not everybody doing full carbonic or carbo, not everybody doing full natty. There is a diversity. There are producers that fit in those spectrums, but it's just like any other wine region where you have niches. It just depends, but the overarching movement is one towards regenerative viticulture. It's just tricky because it was interesting when we tasted through wines like, oh, here's my certified organic wine. It's 10 euros more than the normal just because of what I have to go through to do that. And I also have only like 250 cases of it because of the extent that I have to go to make that happen. Whereas this gets the same practices, but isn't certified. And so that's a tricky piece of it too, because it's hard to ask 40 euros a bottle for a Beaujolais in France or $60 a bottle in the US for a bottle of Beaujolais if you're not, at this point, Foillard or Petron or Metros or whatever. And so that's kind of the factors that go into it, but I was refreshed to see that it wasn't just that. So, good questions. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. These gentlemen touched on it. That is definitely the way that the vineyard is going back to. I always think it's interesting that for a lot of people, the reference on Beaujolais is the natural wine movement, is this thing. And Jules Chauvet, of course, a very notable vigneron and also chemist. Of course, he came from Beaujolais and is very influential there. But I always like to think about it too for the producers that are leaning towards that natural style. The traditional form of semi-carbonic fermentation in Beaujolais is kind of well suited towards general non-interventionalist winemaking. And I mean, the vineyards take a lot of work, but they are kind of also well suited for that because you do have a lot of these Beaujolais vines that are old vine material that now that you're treating them organically or potentially biodynamically are healing and are in such good shape to really produce these wines that are so site-specific, and to do it in a style that is a little bit more hands-off. I think it's the beauty of that. I think everybody has a different lens of like, okay, this was my introduction to Beaujolais. My introduction to Beaujolais was through the cruise. I skipped the whole Nouveau thing. I was like, why does everybody keep talking about this?
Yeah, but that's kind of the two stereotypes that bookend a lot of things and where you go with the conversation of Beaujolais. You end up in a Nouveau conversation, or you end up in a natural conversation. And so it's something that I'm glad it's been addressed in both ways today, because I feel like it's part of the history and part of the fabric of where the wines have come from, but it's also not the overarching factor that should be looked at. So that's the hope of today is looking at it in a different way than just those two things.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Looking for a unique wine tasting experience? Look no further than Dracaena Wines' tasting room in downtown Paso Robles. Located on the corner of 13th and Pine, this charming spot is not your average winery. Founded by passionate wine lovers who also happen to be the brains behind Cab Franc Day, Dracaena Wines is proud to call themselves home of Blanc de Franc. This crisp and elegant white wine has gained a cult following and is just one example of their superb offerings. With over 10 years of consistently receiving 90+ ratings from top critics, These wines are sure to impress even the most discerning palates. So come raise a glass with us and celebrate great wines at Dracaena Wines' tasting room.
Hopefully the wines are tasty. Yeah. I mean, it is a fruit day for those of you who are I always like playing that game.
The Beaujolais Nouveau and Natural Nouveau really brought to what we taste today to the table, because it helped us as a wine grower to kind of revise our way of growing vines, so by doing a little bit less interventionist, more organic, and in terms of viticulture and winemaking, like it's also helped us to develop other type of style, realizing that some of our wine could be very premium when they treat a specific way. So those guys we were mentioning before from Mongo, they really help us to premiumize the image of most of the, and that's opened a lot of eyes for the Beaujolais producers. Say, okay, yes, I should do better. I should do semi-carbonate that way. I should try other things, harvest less, and improve the average.
What do you think? Any big preferences? 21, 22?
If we could have like 37 wines in front of you, it would be nice to have like Shrubla from 21, 22, and 20. It would be nice to have Morgon from Granite in 21 and 22, Morgon from the Côte de Pie in 21 and 22. So you can see when we talk about water retention of soils and how they handle the stress of like a 20 in Morgon versus the Côte de Brouilly versus Moulin Avant, where wind plays a factor in the skins get thicker. Like it's fun to play across vintages and see where these things go. So I'm enjoying the lineup so far. I loved 22s. Back to your aging question, or excuse me, 21s. But some of them I'm wondering if some of the fruit is dialing back in, it's becoming more and more crunchy and more herbal. So I'd be curious to try 21s over the next 12 to 24 months. But I feel like the next flight that you guys are about to have is a fun one, because you're going to get Pierre Bleu across a couple different vintages. And so if you can, pour out your glasses. Most of you are already well ahead of me. Probably not switching in terms of pouring out glasses, and then I'm going to get the next wine poured. But should we move into Pierre Bleu?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
All right, so Pierre Bleu, to me, this is potentially the one soil of Beaujolais that is not discussed nearly as much as it should be, particularly in more U.S.-based sommelier-facing text. Again, it's it made it very, very simple. Beaujolais is granite and some limestone and a little bit of alluvia. For me, Pierre Bleu is like that soil that just needs to be discussed more. It's so integral to several of the crus, and also as veins going throughout Beaujolais, and it creates a very distinct style of Beaujolais for me. So again, Pierre Bleu, we're literally talking blue rocks, and again, when you see these in the vineyard, they are, as the name implies, they are blue. These are igneous rocks that came out when Beaujolais was underwater, therefore they cooled very, very quickly and very, very hard. So again, this is Côte de Pie in Morgon. This is what it actually looks like in the soil. So in the vineyard, this is from right at the crest, where you have these Pierre Bleu, and again, you just have these hard blue rocks scattered about all of these old vines of Gamay.
Yeah, Côte de Pie is interesting because it does have a predominance of volcanic bluestone, but it also has like shale or schist. There's an iron oxide element to it, and even a vein of manganese, like we talk about in Moulin Avant. And so, once again, another example of there's more than meets the eye of just classifying the Côte de Pie in particular as this roche-pourri aspect to it. So,
yeah. And then another thing to keep in mind too, Côte de Pie is, I think, 225 hectares.
Yeah.
So it is this rounded hill. So
once again, like not to throw Chenin under the bus, like Chenin or Renier kind of like size, so it's the same as that. Yeah.
So the first two wines that are coming around, Juliana. Juliana is interesting in that it is the least granitic of all of the crus. It is basically 90+% of this bluestone with a little bit of alluvium and colluvium on the eastern flanks. But by and large, you're talking about this big amphitheater of bluestone and these really, really striking exposures. And you get some of the steeper slopes within Beaujolais, even though there's steep slopes throughout all the crus. You get some of the steeper ones still in Juliana. So it's also an absolutely gorgeous area. Again, if you ever have a reason to just buy the plane tickets today, take a trip to Beaujolais, it's incredible.
Well, Juliana, like you were talking about earlier, is one that gets overlooked too often in terms of its location, and given a fairly generic description if you reference some wine texts in terms of studying or whatnot, and it's one that I think the Pierre Bleu piece will lend it more cachet. I'm already starting to see it a little bit that we've taken it out. The Juliana that I've seen, it's for a structured, almost Syrah-like expression of Gamay. Juliana is where it's at. And you get two examples today that are slightly different in terms of the winemaking piece, so pay attention to that. But Greg and I have talked quite a bit about how Beaujolais was an enigma and tricky sometimes in terms of blind tasting, and there's some elimination of that in terms of depending on what cru you're playing with or what vintage. And Juliana was one that was tricky because of this piece of it. It was just like, oh, well, that's just one of the side crus that should be Beaujolais. Why can't I identify it? Well, it's mostly volcanic rock. It comes off with these really taut, punchy, acid, peppery, kind of dark, smoky characteristics to it. The Pierre Bleu lends to the Gamay grape in riper vintages, and voila, there you have it. And that's cru specifics. That's a signature de Juliana that wasn't there, that we didn't talk about very much until now. I've been doing this, and I love that piece of it.
Yeah, there's been more than once that blinded a Beaujolais to Northern Rhone. And there's other reasons why you shouldn't do that, but certainly the bluestone character, like I used to always think, okay, I messed up that blind because of the granite, right? Granite in Northern Rhone, granite in Beaujolais. And the more that I got into it, I started to realize that probably the wines that I messed up on that I took to Northern Rhone because of that kind of a little bit darker fruit profile, a little bit of that kind of black pepper note, and a little bit of that more kind of intensity in the tannins. Might have very well been examples that were grown on Pierre Bleu, not granite. I just made the assumption, right? Granite, probably why I messed it up. But to me, the Pierre Bleu takes on a little bit of that darker fruit, a little bit more of the intensity, and it's really, really beautiful kind of black pepper side to it. Juliana, just right here, is really forming the core of it is this big amphitheater, all of bluestone. So this is facing more or less south, southwest, southeast. And so all on that southern side of the dial creates a little bit more powerful style of Juliana. And also the steep slopes. Like you look at the top here, you're at 550 meters. And the bottom, you're at 300 and change. So you drop 200 meters in the space of basically a kilometer. And so steep grades all the way throughout, 20+%. And in the steeper sections, it reaches 30-35%. Really striking hillsides to see. This first wine comes from the Louis D of La Chair. So La Chair, named so because previously cherry trees were planted on the area. I think Gamay works a little bit better. And we'll go through, so we've got two Juliana and Côte de Brouilly. So Côte de Brouilly is also like the kingdom of bluestone, right? If there's three areas of the crus that you really look for bluestone in the easiest way to kind of think of, it's Juliana, Côte de Brouilly, and specifically the Côte de Pie in Morvan. As you saw, it's really just the Côte de Pie that is that bluestone. The rest of it is these more granitic soils. This church at the very top of this striking hill, so it was built to protect the vines. I think it's a nice touch. It's great. There's churches all throughout, but I think it's fantastic that one of the highest zones in the area, they built a church to protect.
Well, I can't remember the story exactly, but I think it has ties. Like the patron saint of that church is something involved with vines, and there is a archaic story of where a vintage was going to shit everywhere, and the people of Brouilly Côte de Brouilly went to the church, and their vintage was saved, and they were the only ones who had a decent vintage that year, and so it's taken on this almost legendary kind of feel to it at the top of the Côte de Brouilly. And I apologize if somebody knows the story and I'm butchering it was. But it's.
But I'm sure you're
Right. You can look it up somewhere in terms of the. I think they mentioned it on the Beaujolais website if somebody wants to reference it. But the church does have ties to the wine industry, and in terms of during a rough weather period, going there and praying to a higher power for please save our vines because it's all we have to be able to put food on the table during the winter. Totally.
talking about a little bit of the story. Juliana, the name of the village, comes from the Romans. It's to pay tribute to Julius Caesar. So all viticulture was already during the Roman time. We were growing vines. And a bit story of the Gamay grape, which had been banished from Burgundy. So in 15th century, the Duke of Burgundy, which was as powerful as the King of France at this time, because Burgundy was from Netherlands to Belgium to Burgundy and to the south of Beaujolais. So the Duke was very in big competition with the King of France, and he decided in 1395 to banish the Gamay from the Great Burgundy. The Gamay and the Pinot Noir was planted in those regions, but more and more producers were starting to plant in Gamay, and the Duke wasn't happy about that because the Gamay was easier to grow, was easier to produce at this time, and he was relying on the monk of the Côte who was growing Pinot Noir. So he pushed out the Gamay, but luckily it didn't push out Beaujolais, because I think what it was great for the Gamay, and that's probably a good reason that he did that. It's as we said, like the great Gamay on the blue stove, on the granite stove mostly, and which is the soil that we can't find in the north of Burgundy, like from Puy-Frisé, you're in limestone until the rest of the Burgundy of north. So that's a little story about the Gamay grape. So luckily the Duke didn't take that the Gamay from Burgundy.
We're all thankful. So this first wine we have side by side Juliana. First wine, Domaine Pascal, all from Juliana. This is La Chair. So again, on this parcel where cherry trees were previously. This one, both of these wines are old vine Gamay. This one's about 60-year-old vines. The interesting piece on this is that this is the first vintage 22 that he decided to eschew the use of oak. So these are actually fermented and aged for a touch in the concrete egg to inspire a little bit more of the lees contact and a little bit less of that oxidative character that you get from oak. I like that too. This, it has a little bit of that dark fruit, but Gamay, a great Gamay, even if it has a little bit of dark fruit, it always has a little bit of that classic red fruit too, right? It always stays light on its feet. It always has a beautiful kind of cherry note, sometimes bordering on raspberry, but it's always present, even if it gets a little bit more of that kind of dark cherry, and occasionally that kind of like a darker profile. This one, I think they did an incredible job keeping it so incredibly light and fresh, in a little bit more kind of solar, a little bit warmer vintage. This stays incredibly light on its feet, but it definitely displays a little bit of that classic Juliana, where it is a little bit darker than those more kind of ethereal, lighter, finesse forward red fruit Beaujolais.
Yeah, it's fun to have the three vintages here in terms of the different expressions as well as having two different groups, because you definitely see it in terms of the two solar vintages and seeing the 20 with a little bit of age and then the 23 being so youthful and vibrant. It's a fun set if you want to show it.
And when you talk about the link with Northern Rhone wine, like the second one, like it's very violet-y. The mouth is definitely Gamay, but the nose is very tricky, like blind.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's one of the signatures.
Almost phenolic. The tannin is somewhat phenolic, it's granitic, whereas here we've got there's a sweetness to the finish that doesn't show up in the tannin.
I agree with that totally. I think it's something that gets overlooked a lot because it's a very like personal experience that not as many people are willing to articulate. But no, I think that's spot on. The tannin texture and the way in which it hits in conjunction with acidity as well is part of the signature of I think what separates these wines independent of the like lens of vintage, right? And so I agree with you that the like supple kind of intensity of fruit to go with that moisture wicking nature of the Pierre Bleu compared with kind of that grainy, soft, sandy kind of broadness and phenolic is a good way to describe it for the granite, especially in the Morgon where it was so pronounced as opposed to the Chiruglas where
Well, I think the Chirug was also driven by altitude. The Morgon, it always felt separate because of the ripeness and of the wine. Two others. But looking at the last flight into that wine, the texture of tannin is more apparent here, or the softness of the tannin in those wines. And it reminded me more of a classic Beaujolais, fruit Beaujolais. Beaujolais felt very classic to me, whereas the rest didn't feel as classic.
Which of the Beaujolais, which of the Juliennas do you had more of that classic feel? I'm curious.
Probably the 23.
Okay, I would agree with you there, just because of the solar vintages. And okay.
But the 22 also had, I think you made a comment about looking at producers, even at a vintage like 22, it feels a little bit more restrained than it could have been the use of convention. In this specific vintage, he was able to manage the tannins in a warmer vintage like 22 a little bit.
And I think also the egg piece on the 22, separate that aside. I think your point with the 23 and being typical of what I would associate with blue stone and the fruit that goes with that is very typical of what I associate with not only Juliennas, but an example independent of a really hot, dry year. And it's interesting to have these three in conjunction because you can see where, like, for example, the Côte de Brie separates itself a little differently, being 20 and then also being Côte de Brie is it's fascinating.
But can you add, Côte de Brie versus Brie as somebody who grew up just memorizing fruits, what are the delineated comparisons between the two?
There's a hill, the hill of Brie, where we're talking about the church on the top, and Côte de Brie is it's a small, it's 300 hectares, so pretty small, and all along the slope, the very high, the steepness of the hill of Brie.
The Côte de Brie came about because my understanding is that essentially the producers, they were expanding Brie, and the producers on the Côte de Brie were worried about watering down of the appellation, and so they pursued isolating the Côte de Brie, and whether they knew they had Pierre Bleu or not, which I think they did because it's one of the few places I remember reading about over the years of volcanic blue stone. And I was like, where the hell did this come from? Because I'd never heard of it before. And you hear granite. And
Does
so
Brie not have?
Brie is big. Brie is
big, but it doesn't have the blue.
it has it, but in a minor capacity. It's much more granite.
Yeah.
So when you see like this western flank, it's a lot of that, and it's expensive. Brie's big. Brie's the biggest, yeah.
Brie's big.
Yeah, it's the biggest. That's where you see. Brie is one to pay attention to producer too, because there's a lot of really good quality and old vines, but there's also a lot in the context of Beaujolais. And so there's a lot of gems to be had within Brie, but there's also a lot of wine just produced and exported. Whereas Côte de Brie is a much more finite resource, and it's very, as you see, 60 to 70% bluestone as opposed to a little bit of granite, and it's kind of an outlier in that area because it's more granite in that area. Hopefully that answers your question.
Maybe a few words about the Côte de Brie 2020. So the Momsan winery is based in Quincy-en-Beaujolais. Momsan was founded by the family Momsan, which is a Burgundy and Beaujolais family. The family Momsan used to own the Clos de Tarbes until more recently they sold it to, I don't remember if it's François Pinault or Bernard Arnault, but one of those two guys
But they put a tart because they couldn't buy what? So the story goes that the Moissan family bought Clos de Tart because they couldn't buy Moulin de Vaux.
Yeah.
So they were like, yeah, the good old days settle for some Gregory Burgundy.
And they never made it.
Oh yes, they're Côte de Brie though.
So the Côte de Brie,
I'm talking about Côte d'Ivoire.
this Côte de Brie 2020 it's mostly from the north part of the Côte de Brie because as you can see on the map, so it's all around the Mont Brouilly. So we are in the northern part with the blue stone here. Oops. And also that's where this wine is from. It's very traditional fermentation. We haven't done 2020 was very warm and hot vintage, so we didn't want to keep the wine on the skin too long. So it's just 10 to 12 days of maceration. 12 days of maceration. No carbonic fermentation. We directly starting the fermentation with bumpover and 2 délestage at the end. Aged in a food, so the typical, the traditional way of making in Beaujolais. So 5,000 liters of food and then for another 12 months, and then go just after the harvest of 2021. It's so yeah, very good to see the evolution of the wine. I think it's showing very well. It's just but it's definitely compared to the 21 that you had. That's something you want to enjoy with. I will have a piece of meat or something like that. I think it's the 2020 vintage and those warmer vintage bring more the foodie version of Beaujolais, like in your bouchon of Beaujolais, you want a steak frit with that and you're gonna enjoy it. While the Chiroux version, the 21, are more the wine you can sip with charcuterie just by itself, a little bit chill. So it's just, again, 2 different ways of appreciation of the wine. I think the flight today, like the 9 wines, took you really to the different variety. We didn't have too much of nature wine. We didn't have too much of Beaujolais Nouveau in that flight. But really, the idea was to show you the other part of Beaujolais, and I think the most important part of Beaujolais nowadays. And I think you've been traveling across the different village, across the different history with the vintage, and I think it was a good presentation.
It's interesting with the 20 because as Greg can attest, when we were in Beaujolais last year and then throughout the duration of the seminars we've been able to do, I've been paying attention to 20s because of the drought and the intensity of the ripeness and the tendency to edge into over-ripeness. And so I talked earlier about the water retaining potential of the soils and how bluestone does a little better than granite. It's interesting to see the 20 show this out because this wine is just edging into that camp of where I don't know if it's age as well as vintage, but just edging into that slightly dried fruit camp where the fruit is on the edge of, I would call it jammy, but you're edging that way. And so I wonder if that's the bluestone piece, is that the vintage starting to show its age or what? And so that's where my mind is at with this, especially with coming from the 23 that's so youthful and so violety and so vibrant, and then the 22 where the winemaking plays a piece of it in terms of the amphora, the concrete egg. It's once again me in my head playing cause and effect.
Well, I think the gentleman was talking a little bit about the ageability of Beaujolais. This is a really great example of a wine that is possibly not a wine that I would want to put down for an extended period of time. Whereas, let's say, for 22 or 23 might be something I would want to hold on a little longer than this. This one here is already showing some of the secondaries moving into that. So let's talk a little bit about jam. A lot of it is, we don't talk, nobody's really addressed 20 in terms of harvest and how challenging it was because of it. Regarding a lot of the 20s that I've tasted, I'm sure we all have, in Burgundy in particular, 2021 they're not hit by challenges of artists, they obviously challenges of times and everything. A lot of that is showing inconsistency.
Yep. Well, and it's also one too where playing across the vintages, I said beauty's in the eye of the beholder. There's somebody at some point in some wine bar across this country who's going to think this is like, whoa, I need some more of this. And that's what we got to find. That's what we got to convey. So,
you got to find the ideal science.
So, questions at this point? I know we've kept you guys for a long ass time, so thank you very much for the attention span and the good conversation back and forth and the questions. Back to the pricing, I believe. The bottles, I believe, will be available back if you want to check alcohol content. There should be QR codes in your books. You can check tech sheets in terms of access, I believe, MSRP. But hopefully, as I said, these should be available in market in some capacity in terms of being able to access the price points. It's not something we thought about. The big books in front of you that you have access to, those are a wonderful resource and a huge wealth of knowledge. If you don't want to take them with you, basically, if you go to Beaujolais.com, you can access the maps that we have reference to here that are, oh, shoot, I forgot. Now I'm going to get up on my soapbox about uncork. Hold my beer. I'll let you start so I don't keep everybody here too much longer.
Well, so I'm sure as you all may know, Beaujolais is in the process of codifying and making official its premier cruise. Most particularly, Fleury is kind of leading this charge. They were one of the crews that really focused on it, and I think we're big proponents behind it. They also have several of their Ludi up for contention. Not every crew is participating in this. And at first we thought, so a very notable example, Morgon is not participating in it. At first I thought it was just that they were, too cool for school or whatever. They were Morgoning. But when you actually talk to them, it really has to do with more the fact that their Cléments were never really set up around the idea of making it a crew. Côte de Pie is 225 hectares. It's not really designed around the cruise system, and so instead of chopping it up in pieces that they didn't feel made sense, they chose not to participate in the premier cruise system. However, what I do love about Beaujolais, how they're going about the premier cruise setup, is that all of the ones that are up for contention have a true historic value. They've been on labels for a long time, and they're of a reasonable size that when the premier cruise become official, I think they're going to become extraordinarily useful for sommeliers and eventually consumers to find their favorites.
When it helps promote the site specificities with Ludis, independent of Morgon, and their fact that they have a historic reason for having Cléments, places like Louis-la-Naval and Côte de Bruy and Chirula, for the fact that we talked about that, and Fleury certainly, you can start to see these crews that have historical significance and understand why they are, and that's a good thing for me. Yes, sir.
And John Bonet has just published an historic classification system. I'm afraid I don't know a hell of a lot about it, other than it is based on some 19th century classification.
Yeah, there was a classification. Yep.
That so he's basically archived all that and republishing it. And it's literally due out this month.
The New France, that double tone where he has producers and like notes on regions is awesome. He talks a good amount about this, not quite to the depth, I don't know how much he had in this information, but there's so much detail in there. He talks exactly about that, the classification that existed pre-World War II and pre-Burgundy's classification with Laval, I think, that was very, very in-depth and done by a local expert, and then just fell by the wayside by the fact that Beaujolais decided to go industrial and decided to go Nouveau. And it's...
He's starting to resurrect that.
Yeah. Very cool. I didn't know that it came out.
This one.
I'll have to check that out. Thank you.
Well, that's a great point too. We were explained in the region that one reason that Premier Cruise had not become codified at an earlier time for Beaujolais was during World War II. as the Germans were coming over and they were also kind of ransacking a lot of these Burgundy houses, they were asking, okay, what are the premier crus? Because those were going to be the ones that they were going to be taking. And so since Beaujolais was never part of an occupied territory, they were not required to have those codified nearly to the same level. And so consequently, they never became officialized quite as early. Was the explanation I got from one person in the
The German occupied Beaujolais on the second run. There were for a couple of years. Beaujolais was free because the line, the border at this time was Meursault. And Meursault was at the border of fully occupied German and kind of free France for a couple of years, and then was reinvaded by Germany. And you know the story. They know the story. Thank you.
We've got time for just maybe another question or two. We also have a great meet and greet and hang out, kind of social hour and chat further in the other room just there. But if anybody has any last minute thoughts, ideas, questions.
Yeah, some geos are great resources, as well as the website. So the maps are available on there readily and separated by crew, which is really nice. So it's actually a very well done website. I hope so. That's a great idea. I will pass that along immediately if it's not already in the works. Barolo Barbaresco. Is the Barolo Barbaresco thing go through? Yeah, it's through the gentleman who does. He's the best in that. Yeah, and he. We'll ask. I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's a great idea, especially with the maps in this detail. It would make sense, and it may, who knows, already be in the work. Inter Beaujolais, they're doing a really good job in terms of promoting this study and seizing the opportunity with that information. So, but I'll definitely pass that along. Thank you. Other questions, comments, thoughts? Appreciate all of your time.
This has been another episode of Exploring the Wine Glass. Thanks for listening. If you have suggestions on what topics you would like me to discuss, please reach out on social media. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as Exploring the Wine Glass. I am also on LinkedIn as Lori Hoyt Budd. Of course, you can always email me at exploringthewineglass@gmail.com and sign up for my newsletter at exploringthewineglass.com. If you enjoyed what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe to help others find me more easily. And most importantly, tell your wine-loving friends, because if you like the podcast, they will too. Podcast music is Wine by Kevins. Until next week, sláinte!
I want a nice glass right now.